And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a power talk. It's my absolute honor, pleasure to introduce on stage a lawyer, member of the parliament, former Union Minister of Information and Broadcasting, member of the Parliament Standing Committee on Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him on stage with a very warm round of applause, Mr. Manish Tewari.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's a bit lonely on stage, all by yourself. May I commence by thanking Outlook, the editor, Mr. Ruben Banerjee, the group CEO, Mr. Indraneil Roy, all his colleagues, for inviting me to the Ideas Exchange Conclave of Outlook, or the financial version of Outlook, if I may put it in those words. When Ruben asked me to speak, I was a little intrigued because these are not the usual domains that we inhabit. So therefore, for me also, it was quite a challenge to be speaking to a whole group of extremely distinguished people who've excelled in the world of finance and commerce and generally money. I think there is a gulf which separates us. I've spent 40 years of my life as a public activist, and most of you have spent a lifetime or a career in the business of commerce and financial markets. But I think one thing which unites us is the desire to see India prosper, India grow, and the Indian economy and the Indian people consequentially become far, far more better off than what they were. And so therefore, I am going to draw your attention to a couple of things which have been with me for a while. And it all starts off in 1950, when we wrote the Constitution of India. And in the preamble of the Constitution of India, we made a pledge to our people, a pledge to give them justice, economic, political, and social. I think on the latter two, we may have come some way in the past 70 years. But insofar as economic equity is concerned, and I use the word equity deliberately rather than equality, I think we still have a very long road to traverse. If you were to step back and look at India in a perspective, we are 17.7% of the world's population. We occupy 2.4% of the world's area. But interestingly, 73% of India's wealth is held by only 1% of its people. And so therefore, you have 101 extremely wealthy and prosperous Indians whose collective wealth is in the range of about 20 lakh crores. And if you were to sort of juxtapose that with the entire revenue of the government of India for the last fisc, it was about 27 lakh crores. There are about 8 billionaires in the world who earn as much as, or whose collective wealth is as much as what is held by 400 crore people on planet Earth. They are a bunch of companies whose GDP, about 25 of them, whose individual GDPs are more than the GDP of 85% of the countries on planet Earth. So therefore, there is an inequality which unfortunately is manifesting itself far, far more profoundly and far, far more deeply than what is really visible on the surface of the earth, or what is visible on the surface. In the year 2017-18, the wealth of those 1% of the people actually grew by roughly 4 lakh crores, while the collective wealth of 67 crore people hardly grew by 1% in the corresponding period. And therefore, this worries me. And since we are here in Mumbai, which is a study in contrasts, while you have the glittering financial institutions which support the substratum of the Indian economy, you also have a town which is almost overrun by shanties. And that's something which we should take out time to apply ourselves to, because no country can really progress, become cohesive, if the income and wealth inequalities, rather than lessening, continue to grow as they've been growing in India over the past 3 decades. You know, from 1950 to 1991 was the period of the command economy years, when socialism was at the commanding heights of the Indian economy. And the Indian economy grew by about 4.45% during that period. In 1991, India decided to liberalize. It decided to globalize its economy. And in those 29 years, the Indian economy has roughly grown by about 6.51%. Now, this begs an obvious question, that if globalization and liberalization is the great panacea, the magic bullet that it was touted to bring about greater wealth and prosperity for the bulk of our people, has it really delivered on that mandate? And that's why, if you see around the world, those people who authored the Washington Consensus, who were the harbingers of the neoliberal economic order, they, unfortunately, today are at the forefront of subverting it. Globalization has transformed itself into near proximities in geographical terms. We recently had President Donald Trump, who single-handedly, I guess, is responsible for gutting the multilateral trading order. And therefore, it begs a question that given the kind of diversity, the kind of growing income inequality that we have in India, what is the correct economic model that India should be pursuing? I think that's a very important debate which this country, unfortunately, has not had over the last 30 years. Before the budget, the economic survey is presented. And the economic survey for the year 2020-2021, unfortunately, tried to create a false binary between socialism and a neoliberal economic order. This was a debate that we had 30 years back. This is a debate India settled 30 years back. Irrespective of whichever may have been the shade and the color of the government, the one thing that has been a constant is that we have adhered to an unspoken consensus with regard to a more liberalized, more globalized economic order. But then we really need to think, is this economic order working for the benefit of 134 crore Indians? Or is this economic order working for the benefit of a handful of people whose wealth increases exponentially while the rest of the country stagnates, if not slides back? And therefore, we are at a strange cusp. If you look at the Indian economy today, it would be a bit of an understatement to say that the economy is not doing well. Because if you look at any of the indices, GDP growth at 5% is the lowest in 11 years. Private consumption at 5.8% is the lowest in 7 years. Investment growth at 1% is the lowest in 17 years. Manufacturing growth at 2% is the lowest in 15 years. Agricultural credit at 2.8% is the lowest in 4 years. Bank credit growth between the April and Jan of 2020, which is April 19 to January 2020, was 7.6% as compared to 14.6% for the corresponding period the previous year. Inflation at 7.35% is the highest in 5 years. Unemployment at 6.1% is the highest in 45 years. Exports are down 1.8% as compared to the December of 2018, if you take December 2019 as the benchmark for which figures are available. Imports are down by 8.83% in the corresponding period. Electricity consumption is down by 5%. The household saving rate has come down from 23.6% to 17.2%. So unfortunately, every parameter that you look at does not send out a very comforting message. The fiscal deficit is 14.8% over the budget estimate, and this was the figure for the January of 2020. So therefore, it begs an obvious question that where do we go from here? And I think the obvious answer is that till the time you do not stimulate rural demand in this country, the wheels of the economy are not going to start turning again. 900 million people live in rural India. And that part of India, unfortunately, has decided to squeeze its hand. It could be because disposable incomes have become more tight. It could be that there is a certain fear and insecurity in terms of what pervades the social and the political fabric of the country. And therefore, till that point in time that you do not find a demand-side solution to India's economic problems, I'm afraid the virtuous cycle will not get reinstated. The government during the previous year tried to find a supply-side solution when they brought down the corporate tax rate. From government's point of view, they thought that by making the corporate tax rate competitive, by giving 1,45,000 crores as a write-off to corporate India, the wheels of the economy would start turning. But unfortunately, the last couple of months have really belied that expectation. And therefore, the slide, unfortunately, just does not seem to be contained. I would not be remiss if I said that this is perhaps for the first time after 1991 when India's economic fundamentals are under stress. Savings, consumption, investment, credit offtake, employment, all that which constitutes the fundamentals of the Indian economy are unfortunately giving out distress signals. And the government, at least publicly, is unwilling to acknowledge that there is a problem in the economy. A large number of people that I have had the occasion of interacting with believe that this is not a cyclic slowdown. It is in fact a structural slowdown which is going to take certain extremely fundamental measures to be able to bring the economy back on track. One of the things that we as a country need to seriously address is that India's growth is financed on a very, very narrow tax base. So therefore, you have only 5 crore and 78 lakh income tax payers in this country. And 4% of these actually pay 60% of the tax. So till the time you do not really look at broadening the tax base and think of proposals which are out of box, I'm afraid the progress and the development of 135 crore people cannot really be sustained on such a narrow tax base. Similarly, we have made disinvestment the swan song or the centerpiece of our liberalization. We believe that government should not be in the business of doing business, and therefore there needs to be a wholesale sell-off of the public sector or large parts of the public sector which are inefficient and non-performing. The government has set a target of 210,000 crores that they hope to mop up as a consequence of this disinvestment in the current fiscal. But the question which begs an answer is that should disinvestment proceeds be actually utilized in order to bridge the fiscal deficit? Should it actually finance the expenditure of the government on an year-on-year basis, or those monies need to be put to far, far more productive, sustainable and long-term use than merely balancing the books at the end of a particular fisc. And I think that's another debate that this country needs to have, that should India have a public sector? And if India has a public sector or should have a public sector, what are those essential elements which constitute that public sector? And once you've defined and delineated that, I think you can get on with the job of then deciding at the correct valuation what to do with the rest of the assets that you've created over the past 70 years. Another crisis, and I know we are out of time, and I would just take the last 2 or 3 minutes, which is something very unique and has come up in the last couple of years, is that for the first time, India's financial numbers are being questioned. The integrity of our financial numbers is something which has come into question, which is not a phenomena which we ever saw in the past. We've seen as to how the NSO has repeatedly had to pull surveys which unfortunately were inconvenient for the powers that be. But that is not something which really is in the long-term interest to the country. Because if there is a truth that we need to face, it's better faced rather than swept under the carpet. And the final thought that I will leave you with, which I think is also greatly responsible for the current slowdown that we are witnessing in the economy, is that social disharmony and economic development cannot go hand in hand. In a country where there is social discord, where there is insecurity, where you find the kind of unfortunate and macabre things play themselves out, which we saw happening in Delhi over the past 3 days, I don't think it's a very great advertisement for India as an investment destination. For money is a coward, and money goes to the safest harbor. And India, unfortunately, is not being considered by the world to be a safe harbor. I recall 15 years back at a strategic conference, I happened to listen to one of the former defense secretaries of the United States of America, Donald Rumsfeld, who had spent a lifetime in the corporate world before playing the revolving door between government and corporate America. And he outlined what is called the gate test. He says, all you need to do is raise the gate and see where the money goes. And unfortunately, in this country, as we've raised the gate in the past 2 or 3 years, money has been going rather than coming back. So, ladies and gentlemen, we live in interesting times, not the happiest of times, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic in the collective wisdom of the Indian people. I'm optimistic in the collective entrepreneurship of the Indian people, that what we are seeing hopefully is a temporary phenomena, because for 135 crore people in India, the Indian economy just cannot be allowed to fail. Thank you very much.